4:30 p.m. on May the 2nd, 2023. I call to order the Budget Finance Administrative Committee meeting. And if everyone would bear with me, I've got a bad allergies that's turned into a sinus infection, so hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. A moment of silence, please. Mr. Root?
Yes, sir. Pray with me if you'd like to. Dear Father, we stand in awe of your infallibility, of your infinite nature, your wisdom, your all-powerfulness, and very mindful of our finite nature and our fallibility and our very nominal power and wisdom. So with that, we ask for your guidance, your direction and vision this evening, that council would see that they, as they might not normally see, but through a lens that you craft for them to give them your insight, both now and long into the future. And that this would be your meeting. I pray in your name. Amen.
Mr. Durham, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
See, has Mr. Hart joined us?
Not for the budget meeting.
Not for the budget meeting?
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay. Approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the April 18th, 2023 regular minutes?
I'll make a motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Vote is 3-0.
Okay, presentation, School District of Coney County fiscal year 23-24 budget presentation. Mr. Shingling, hopefully I said your name right.
Schickling.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here to talk about our budget tonight. I've got a PowerPoint prepared for you. So do I advance?
Oh, hang on.
Okay.
Hold up.
Okay, so I'll try to make it brief. This is our best attempt at trying to articulate some of the needs and some of the mandates that we're facing as well from the state. So this is our operating budget proposal for 23-24. And I would say that it currently stands as a work in progress as we wait for the Senate and the House to reconcile with one another and see what the state budget holds in store for us. The first thing I'll do is look at the revenue structure, so what funding is available and what funding we're requesting in order to fund our operation. And then after that, I'll touch on the expenditure footprint and what we're projecting in terms of our anticipated expenses and what's contributing to the growth in the budget. So in terms of revenues, we're anticipating growth in classroom aid. That's a direct state aid that is intended to support increases in the state salary scale. So Governor McMaster and the legislature have been publicly articulating their goal of raising teacher salaries, the minimum salary $10,000 over the next 4 years. This year, the minimum salary scale, it looks like will be increasing $2,500 per cell is the suggestion from the state, although not a mandate. The minimums will increase $2,500 per cell. There's growth in homestead tax reimbursements that we see as a pass-through from the county. So that's tied to the consumer price index, and that has been an 8.6% CPI applied to that. So there's substantial growth there in our homestead tax reimbursement. And then our request for local tax revenue would be the other component of that sourcing for our funding. So this is, I know there's a lot on this slide. I did my best to try to whittle it down to what we're interpreting when we get a projection from the House of Representatives or the Senate, and our state finance department, it's the Department of Education, passes that down to us and says this is something that you can take a look at for your funding. As I spoke before, there's two main sources of educational aid. In the past, that general aid had come in multiple line items, 20-something line items. So an individual amount for students with autism, individual amount for students with speech needs, independent amount for elementary versus middle versus high school classrooms, all of that has been consolidated into one lump sum of classroom aid, use it as you see fit as a district. So that led to some disruptions in budgeting for schools in the past. That was rolled up for this year. And so now we're looking at a potential of close to $2 million increase in that main lump sum of funding formula that's coming from the state. You can see that up there as state aid to classrooms, which GF means general fund. There's also a line of aid to classrooms that we receive in a separate fund. It's not in our general operating fund, it's in a state grant fund that is transferred into our general fund to support certain expenses. Now, as we'll see during the expenses, there are some positions that are funded in that separate grant that the state is again going to consolidate and push into our general fund. So we'll now be expected to move those positions into our general fund. And in addition to the salary and benefit costs of our rollover of staffing, we'll now have those new positions coming in. We'll also have that state funding coming with it. So you can see there's an increase there that's anticipated of about 1.3 million. And then our tier 3 reimbursements about 1.6 million, which is that index to CPI for the reimbursements for homesteaders. So from our state sources, we're anticipating somewhere in the region of 5.5 million. Again, this is based on the most recent House projections. The Senate projections have just been released. So we're going to go back and take a look at how those things may change. Bus driver salaries are not included in here, which have an aid associated with them. So we would anticipate that by the second read, by your first read of the budget, the school district's second read, we may be reducing our request to the county for funding if we see more state sources. In terms of the local effort coming from the county, what I've done here is included a history of funding by year. Again, all of our funding is tied to the value of property and value of assessments, and that generates the collections by the county as assessed by the auditor. So in looking at that, you see the change in assessed value year over year, and 21 and 22 stand out as assessments have grown substantially in comparison to those prior years. And what we're seeing is that the collection amount also has grown substantially. So with the goal, the articulated goal of the district of living within the millage that's provided to us without requesting any increases, we do have an increased request that's consistent with the growth in assessments. So we don't anticipate that there would be any change to mills. Of course, that's not our job to project. But current millage in 2022 resulted in $50.9 million of collections, so roughly 51. Through March, we are at $48,954,000. And in the past couple of years, collections in that April through June time period have been in excess of $2 million. So we would anticipate that collections are going to exceed 51 million if things remain on the same course that they have in the past couple of years. So our request of currently 50.3 million should live well within those boundaries, even without any growth in assessments. And as we've seen, the housing market has led to pretty substantial growth in property value. So I think it would be fair to anticipate that there may be growth again. And I would reiterate that that current request is based on the current state aid numbers. If we see any additional funding from the state, we may be able to revise this by the county's first read of our budget to ask for substantially less than 50 million, certainly. And then just a comparison of where Oconee stands in terms of the mills levied for operations, with the lowest 10 districts in the state up for comparison purposes, and the mills levied for debt service. So as somebody who moved here from upstate New York, paying in the vicinity of $9,000 of property taxes on a $250,000 home, I'm certainly appreciative of our efforts to respect homeowners and a reduced tax burden for the membership of our county. In terms of the 8 items that are consolidated when we're talking about state funding, we have positions that are career counselors. They help students learn about transitions as they move on from their education into career pathways. We have school nurses in our elementary schools that are funded by state funds, and we have some physical education support positions So all of those positions are now being moved into the general fund from outside funds. So when you look at total budget growth, that accounts for about 850,000 of that growth is mandating these positions back to the general fund. So in terms of big picture, our revenues per our budget and our request would be constituted of about 53 million, well, almost $54 million of local sources. That includes fee and lieu and penalty in our value there. And then our restricted state funding. Again, I talked about how all the aid was consolidated last year. And so in our projections and what the Senate and House had put out last year, we have over budgeted a little bit for our general fund for the current year and under budgeted for the transfers coming in from the outside funds. And so that does lead to some adjustments. You see, actually, our state sources look like they're going down. We're more accurately reflecting what our general funds aid is, and we're more accurately reflecting the interfund transfers in. And that would account to a $122 million budget, and that is about 7.6% growth. So I know that the first read of one of our neighbors was about 7.3% growth. We're looking at the CPI that was applied to our Tier 3 at 8.6, and some of the mandates that we're facing that I'll talk about in the expenditure side of this. But it is substantial growth, and we're recognizing that. But there are also substantial impositions being made and substantial needs for technology as we come out of the pandemic and have implemented one-to-one learning. So for the expenditure side, 90% of our budget is direct personnel costs. So when we talk about that 7.6% growth, that's predominantly going to salaries and benefits across the board. The state salary scales are driving that cost growth as we have had communications with the regional districts around us. They've all expressed their intent to try to match the legislature's intent of going up $2,500 per cell. So whether you're a first-year teacher or whether you're a 25th year teacher, their intent is that the salary schedule increases $2,500 for every place in that cell and every employee. And one of the things that we are now budgeting into the general fund, although we're graduating it slowly, is we have gone to a one-to-one educational program. Part of that is the need for electronic assessment, electronic evaluation of students in their placements. And so we now operate one-to-one with devices. We've purchased those with federal funds, meaning the CARES Act and the Coronavirus Recovery Act. And in order to replace those as they age out of service, we will need to have a general fund line item to support those. In terms of some of the growth here, what we've done is we've done some regional analysis in any of the published salary scales of the districts around us to look at the competitiveness of our district. We want to try to attract qualified staff. And if you look at our teaching assignments with a master's degree, bachelor's would closely mirror that. While competitive, we were near the lower end of that range. So we are trying to match the increase in the salary schedule per the House and Senate. We've added a few $100s to the very first few steps to try to become more competitive recruiting those college graduates, trying to get them into the teaching career with us. One of the things that is not, I think, well understood oftentimes, when you look at $2,500 of growth for a teacher, that also comes with it step movement. So you may see a cell on our schedule increase $2,500, well, that teacher is also going to gain experience. That would add in addition to that. And then with any personnel cost, with the retirement system and Medicare and Social Security, the district's tacking on another 30% cost to any additional salary. We also have close to a 10% increase in our benefit costs. So, one teacher's $2,500 cell movement could actually lead to anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 depending on their benefit eligibility and what they've selected for their retirement and health care. In terms of classified positions, to the best of our ability, we did some similar analysis, found that we were on the lower end of pay for some of our classified positions. In particular, custodians has been a difficult area for us to fill. And our bus drivers, the competitive wage has been $15 plus per hour at the start of the salary schedule, and we were at $13.75. So we knew before any of these mandates came down, we had to do some readjustment for competitiveness. What I would say is that we don't have very many individuals that are under 5 years' experience. So most of our drivers are in a competitive range with other districts around us. But it can be difficult for the recruitment purposes. Now, since the House projections have come out, the Senate has expressed their intent to mandate a $2,500 increase for all bus drivers, which accounts to somewhere between $3 and $4 per hour for bus drivers across the board. So this has been adjusted since our initial presentation to show us moving up to that $17 an hour range. And other districts have to maintain their schedule and add to it. So other districts are going to be increasing, in some cases, close to $19, $20 an hour as a starting range. So these projections show, to the best of our ability, within certain constraints, our ability to maintain competitiveness with drivers, maintain competitiveness with custodians. I would say that our classified staff are the only staff really that don't fall into, and our administrators, are staff that don't fall into a mandated state salary schedule like our teachers and bus drivers do. So our increase there year over year for them ranges from the lower end, maybe 6% or so, for somebody who's making right now $11.25 an hour, up to maybe 3.5 or 4% at the higher end, which on average is about $1,700. So again, when you're seeing, teachers and bus drivers making an additional $3,000 and you're a custodian, that can be very difficult, but we're doing our best to make sure that our budget is manageable. Sustaining one-to-one instruction, again, I spoke to that a little bit. This is a projection as to what our needs are to make sure that our district has the devices that teachers and students need to have to deliver quality instruction on a one-to-one basis. So what we've done is looked at the number of devices we have deployed, how long we project their useful life to be before their end of life. For teacher and student devices, a lot of that is determined really by the companies we buy them from, because they're going to have technology that becomes antiquated, they're going to have licenses that expire, and so we need to replace them in a time period that we can have new devices for students or teachers at the time that those become antiquated. So in looking at the quantity that we would need to purchase per year for a consistent purchase to maintain this program, it comes out to close to $1.5 million. We have tried to migrate about $1 million into this budget to begin to honor that and make purchase locally, because our federal funds are coming to a close and we won't be able to utilize those in the near future. So in summary, this doesn't account for all of the budget growth year to year. But this kind of breaks down a line item as to those elements that we've talked about. The state teacher scale accounts for about $2.5 million of budget growth. We do have a state mandate now for unencumbered time for elementary teachers. So the way we're going to achieve that, or propose to achieve that, is by adding some monitors that can help supervise kids at lunch, at recess, at those times when they are not receiving direct instruction, so that we can meet the mandate to allow teachers to have unencumbered time. So that would include some positions for those monitors. The nurses, counselors, career counselors, and PE teachers coming back into the general fund accounts for about $850,000 of growth. The classified salaries, which is about 550 employees for us, is about $1.3 million of growth. And those include their related retirement benefits as well, so that 30% is inclusive in that number. Employer healthcare premiums, again, this is set by PEBA. We don't have discretion in that value, so PEBA says, here's how much you're going to pay next year. So that's approximately a 10% aggregate increase. And then the cyclical replacement cost of the Chromebooks, the panels, and the teacher devices. And kind of color-coded for how much discretion the district has. So in some cases, it's just, the state mandates this is what you have to do. In some cases, we are implementing with some discretion. But again, on the teacher scale, it's a firm recommendation short of a mandate. And then a total budget breakdown shows that salary and benefit growth are the primary cost drivers here, account for about 90% of our budget. So just trying to lay that out in a way that's easily digestible and explains what our request is. Happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Any questions?
So the $2,500 per salary increase, we're above the minimum, right? But it's coming from the state, is it funded from the state? Do they provide additional funding?
They do, we'd have to do the math to see whether that ties out as a one-to-one and fully funds, because what the state does is they assume a ratio of teachers, and they assume a certain level of experience. So if our teachers don't match that exact model, if we have more experienced teachers, it may not keep up with it. If we exceed their ratios, it may not keep up with it, and that's where our local component comes in. And that, initially, we had conversations about, do we honor that at the bottom end, because that is the minimum of the scale, and maybe graduate it? And the feedback from the districts in the AOP area was, we all intend to try to match that. And so I think our concern then was competitive disadvantage.
And that's what we're kind of facing in the county too, as a whole, is competitiveness for employees. So I understand that. And another thing I noticed was the Chromebooks. Have y'all realized any cost savings in printer and paper and stuff since you went to a lot of digital use?
Yeah, I believe we have. We also, we run a managed print contract through Sharp Business Solutions. So they make sure that ink comes when we need it. They make sure that and we use a paper product as well. So that minimizes, running prints without intent and just running extra pages. I would have to go back and really do some math historically to quantify that. But I believe we have realized, and that's reflected in the budget as well.
Any other questions?
I don't have any.
So are you guys gonna come back to us once you come up with some finalized numbers?
Yes,
or-
sir. We have a board meeting on the 15th, and so at that time, we're going to revise these for our board's second read. And then your first read, you'll have updated numbers that'll reflect the true and formal request.
Okay, so we don't need to take any formal action right now?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, discussion items. Fiscal year 23-24 budget discussion and review. Ms. Brock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Finance Administration Committee, and the members of the public. You do have in front of you a revised 2023-2024 proposed budget as per the recommendation and authorization from council from the last Budget Committee meeting, which was held on 4/18. Thank you so much, Jennifer. You'll see the reduction of a total of $1.8 million. Just briefly, I'm going to go through a short summary of what those cuts were and what anticipated impacts of those cuts were. General cuts departmentally were small and many. We figured it was a better approach to do a couple thousand here, 1,000 there, 100 here, a few hundred there. Resulting in a savings of a little more than $190,000 through departmental cuts. And none of these cuts will have an impact on service for the departments that were affected by the cuts. All of the changes in the budget book as of today's date are reflected in kind of a coral orange-ish color. Jen, if you can go to page 2 for me, there you go. So you'll see here, we also included the percent increase or decrease in a green column to your right. This, I think, is good policy moving forward. Just a quick glance, you can tell what items increase, what items decrease, and what changes were made. But as you flip through the departmental pages, any change made from the April 18th to today's meeting are in that kind of coral orange color. Position cuts included I don't remember the name of the position. A caseworker in the probate court office, the voter registration specialist in registration and elections, the senior tax record specialist in the treasurer's office, the counseling position for the libraries, and the conversion for the part-time to full-time staff member in the finance office. Other cuts, if you'll see on the administrator's page, I don't know what page that is, but I can get to it pretty quickly, 26. With the number of vacancies that we have currently and the new position request that we did leave in,
We do anticipate a 1.3, and potentially greater than that, but we utilized a 1.3 salary savings. That number is $356,765. And we did make several capital changes. That capital page, I'm having Jen jump back and forth. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's page 22. It'll be up on your screen. There we go. So again, any change is in the orange coral color. I'm going to go through these capital cuts because some of these things we have the good fortune of being able to allocate funding from other financing options and or grants for these, and that these weren't cut entirely from the budget process, but was reallocated in a different manner. So the $15,000 for the airport taxiway improvement, we believe that we can find that from professional funds throughout the budget year and savings and other. That's a matching amount for FAA and SC Aeronautics Commission grant. The detention center, the $100,000 for the body scanner, we did secure a grant for that. We learned about that grant the day of April 18th, on the last time we presented the budget. And Sheriff Crenshaw has notified me that the camera system that we need for the upgrade camera system at the detention center will be covered by state allocated funds. So that $500,000 savings is quite significant. And we're still being able to obtain the capital out of this. Facilities maintenance, we did cut $50,000 for the paving of the DSS/facilities maintenance parking area. Again, I believe that this could be a fund allocation resulting in savings throughout the county, and if necessary, with salary vacancy savings, we would be able to come back to council and request these funds for allocation. We trimmed the $11,000 for the one-time fee for ClearGov out of finance and included that in the professional line item in the administrator's office. And the mulching head and stump shearer, say that 3 times fast, both of those capital purchases are on the agenda this evening for council consideration. So we were able to allocate the funds for that for this evening's council meeting. The fencing and gates at Strawberry Farm and the scale house, the additional funds needed for the scale house, that's for the second entrance, the one that's just behind the Strawberry Farm Convenience Center now, for the traffic relief on Wells Highway. We believe that we can secure a grant for the additional funds needed for that. Now, we may have to come back to council for matching funds for those, but we do believe that we can secure a grant for that. And you'll see in the expenditures, or the revenue summary, again, sorry, page 2. Again, those changes highlighted in that coral/orange color. We do anticipate local government fund being funded fully, so there was a small change there, an increase. A small decrease in license permits and fees, as we may anticipate some slowing down. So there was small reductions in both building codes and register of deeds, and a leveling out of the other financing sources. We did take a $250,000 transfer that was previously in. This was something we had discussed last year during budget season. The rock quarry does typically $1 million transfer into the general fund budget, but after reviewing carefully with staff during the budgeting process this year, we are in need of rewording and reworking our land acquisition fund. So that $250,000 was set aside to establish a larger balance for that land acquisition fund. And that's a matter that will be brought back before the Real Estate Facilities and Land Management Committee for discussion. Typically now we reserve 25 cents per ton, not per cost, but per ton, for the land acquisition fund. That amount was established in the 1970s and is not adequate for what we know the future of the quarry needs will be now. So as council directed, the cuts were, as I highlighted, and again, they are listed on each one of the departmental pages, highlighted in that coral kind of orange color. But we did bring the budget amount to the direction of $65,231,000. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions?
I don't have questions, but I'm just gonna make a few statements. So we know, as a school district, which is in here, that we're in a competitive market for employees. And we know that, some wages need to come up, and we need adjustments. For some, which I think emphasis should be on law enforcement and first responders, it's easy to gauge that. The sheriff's will provide a lot of information from neighboring agencies, and you can see what other people's paying. Others, I'm not so sure it's that easy, because you're not just competing against neighboring governments, you're competing against private industry. And for the first reading in the next meeting, I intend to make a motion that we take the amount of money that is reserved for raises. We pull from that to give a 3% cost of living raise to all employees. We reserve the remaining amount to distribute as wage increases, salary bands, will it be a pay scale step, for us to determine at a later time, once we have better knowledge, better data. I think we owe that to the taxpayers, not just the employees, but the taxpayers, to make sure we pay employees adequately. And that is to not overpay, but also not underpay. We have a cycle of employees turning over to be efficient. And to include in that, I'll make the motion next meeting, but also, to use that funds if needed, if we determine for a salary study. And we may be able to do that successfully internally, or we may need to reach out for an external study as well. But to make sure that the citizens are getting good quality service, I think that needs to be done versus just blanket percentage, across the board increases. There's some people probably need to go up 10%, some people may not need to, so it's just, we gotta know where we're putting the money and allocate it correctly. And like I said, I think a focus is first responders, but we also need to look at everything. I mean, if you don't have a motor pool, first responders aren't responding, so we gotta be competitive all the way around. But just to give you guys a heads up, and I think it'd be appropriate prior to the first reading, since that's on the agenda, this budget is this document now, and I can make the motion in the normal council meeting.
So let's make sure we understand what
Yeah.
you're proposing. So are you saying that is it 2.5 million, the step increase this year?
It's a little over like 2,052,000, maybe something like that.
So you're
2053.
saying instead of doing a step increase this year, we would do it 3% across the board? Is that-
I'm saying 3% to be effective July 1st. The rest of it to reserve, to then determine, the staff's they've done a lot of work on a step and scale increase. And I've looked at, the more I look at it, sometimes the less I like it. I think we still needs more work to either at a later time implement the step and scale, or would that be to increase salary range bands? Whatever council decides to do, but to make sure we do it right versus.
So do we know how much 3% would be across the board?
I left my sheet.
Right at a million.
It's roughly around
994. Adding 3% to the new positions was just a hair over $1 million.
Okay, so you'd have $1 million increase, excuse me, and you'd have $1 million administrative fund, so to speak, in reserve for, like you said, even that pay.
To bring up who needs to be brought up and to make versus just a straight, shot across board, like I said we did last year.
Well, why don't you make that motion now so they can have it ready for first reading?
Mr. Chairman, we have first reading in
Well, first reading's today, right?
an hour, yes. So it would
Okay, so it'll be second reading.
It would be better to make it during, when you have the budget in front of you.
Okay, so you'll make this motion tonight?
That's right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I please make a
Sure.
comment?
Sure.
Mr. Durham, I appreciate that. First pay date in July is July 14th. I appreciate the motion for the intent to be on July 1st, but that's a split pay period between 2 fiscal years. And that
Whatever
might-
it would need to be
Okay.
when the budget comes
When
in.
you make that motion later
Yeah.
this evening, if you'd like, I need to make a notation for you that is the first pay date of, or first day of a new pay period in the new budget year.
When we passed last year's budget for the cost of living, did it go into effect the first pay period in July?
It did.
Okay.
Because that last pay period is typical, it bridges 2 budget years, and it would be very difficult for us to do 3% on these 3 days or whatever, however many number of days that's lingering from current budget year over to the new budget year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, Don? Ms. Mike, do you have anything
If
else?
there are no further questions, no, sir.
The motion to adjourn?
Make a motion?
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.